If you've ever known someone who's had a mental illness, or if you've had one yourself, you'll understand that they can't always be explained logically. Whether we're thinking about the causes of a disorder, how it affects a person, or finding cures, mental illness often acts randomly and unpredictably. With that being said, psychologists have tried very hard to explain how and why things go wrong in our minds. Some believe mental illness is entirely based on our body's scientific processes, while others believe it's based on the events that happen to us. I will argue, however, that perhaps mental illness is really a mixture of both of these factors that cooperate to create problems in the functioning of the mind. Rather than contributing to mental illness perfectly 50-50, these two areas likely look more like a spectrum. Some disorders are shifted more towards the biological side of the spectrum, with environmental factors still being present in smaller doses, and vice versa.
What do you mean by biological and environmental?
By biological, I mean the scientific processes that happen inside of us, and by environmental, I mean the outside things that happen to us. So an example of where we can see this spectrum in action is anxiety disorder. Some scientists attribute it to behaviors that are learned, while others believe it's more likely passed down between generations. This is discussed in the OCD and anxiety disorders crash course video. Anxiety comes from fear, which is a survival instinct, but fear alone does not cause a person to develop anxiety disorder. Illnesses like generalized anxiety disorder happen when these fears are conditioned or reinforced, which causes them to grow from just concern about immediate threats into worry about potential threats.
What does it mean to be conditioned or reinforced?
So conditioning happens as a cause of reinforcement. Reinforcement is when behaviors are rewarded, and that reward causes the behavior to be repeated. So anxiety disorder may be triggered by a traumatic event or conditioned over time, both of which may be considered environmental factors. But then there are cases like mine. I haven't experienced any real traumatic events. My parents are still together. I was never really picked on as a kid, but I still experience anxiety sometimes. I look back on my childhood and I can't think of any event or experience that could be directly related. So that leads me to the conclusion that maybe it's based more on brain chemistry. With this disorder, evidence suggests that it's mostly environmentally caused, with roots in biological fears, which is displayed in this graphic. But as I've just discussed, some cases may be shifted closer to the biological side of the spectrum, like this. Another example of how different mental disorders are seen is when looking at attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. This disorder is rather controversial, as many people have such strong opinions about its causes. The majority of support lies behind genetic risk factors, 75% according to the Noble article on ADHD. This would mean that the disorder lies closer to the biological side of the spectrum of mental illness, seen here.
What are some of the less supported environmental explanations?
So some of the less popular environmental explanations include poor nutrition or diet, poor parenting, and exposure to toxins. The ASAP Science video on ADHD restates that while environmental factors are linked to the disorder, it's highly related to genetics and reward pathways in the brain. Evidence shows that children with ADHD have lower brain volume, especially in the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in attention, emotions, and self-control. As seen in the examples of generalized anxiety disorder and ADHD, mental illnesses can greatly differ in their causes and the levels to which biological and environmental factors are involved, especially on an individual basis. Anxiety disorders are mostly caused by outside events, while ADHD is mostly caused by genetics inside. But it is important to recognize the use of the word mostly. It's very possible that all mental illnesses involve both types of factors, and that presentation relies on the degree to which each of these factors exist.
So mental illness happens because of how we were born and how we were raised?
That's right.